Well, there we go. I'm muted. Sorry about that. I'm Bobby Gilstrap. Welcome to our podcast tonight. We're glad to have you joining us this evening. This is part of our series of interviews with SBC 24 presidential candidates. Our guest tonight is one of the 6 announced nominees or to be nominated, Dr. David Allen. His biographical information will be in the video description. You can look there and take a look at it if you'd like to see more about his background. So I'd like to bring David on. David, we are so glad to have you joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Bobby. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Well, it's good to have you joining us, and we're not going to spend a lot of time, as I mentioned, on a lot of background and that kind of thing, but we are going to jump right into our conversation. I believe I've mentioned before that there are 3 kinds of questions that we're basically asking, and I'll say this to our listeners just to remind them to be sure. Questions to all the candidates, and that's part of what we'll do initially. Maybe any unique questions to the individual candidate, and then maybe additional questions from the viewers. And tonight we're going to try to cover a number of different items, views on abuse reform, progress of the GCR, the Great Commission Resurgence, the lawsuits that are, there's a plethora of lawsuits out there right now, declining membership, possibly the continued pleas for transparency, law amendment. There's just a lot of issues that we're going to try to address tonight during the hour that we're together. So let me first do this. Why don't you, in this sense, introduce yourself by telling us how are you alike or different from our previous presidents, the most recent presidents being Bart Barber, Ed Litton, and J.D. Greer. How do you compare?
Well, I suppose I'm like them in that I'm a Southern Baptist, dyed in the wool, just like they are, committed to the Southern Baptist Convention, serving the Lord. I've done so all of my life, serving in Southern Baptist churches as pastor and interim pastor, but also serving in Southern Baptist entities, particularly 18 years in one of our seminaries. And then on top of that, as a Board of Trustee member for 12 years of a seminary, and many other roles and responsibilities in local associations, state convention here in Texas, as well as the national convention. And so I have served in many different roles, many different responsibilities, like I would say most of those men have. So I would say those would be areas of similarity. There might be some differences between maybe some of the approaches that they have taken in the past to the SBC and to some of the issues that we are facing, some of the things that decisions that they have made or actions that they have recommended, would certainly agree with. Others, some decisions that they've recommended that I probably would not agree with. The methodology of going about addressing some of the issues and problems in our convention. There might be some differences between me and those men. I know all of those men. I'm a friend. I've known them all for years. I love them and appreciate them and appreciate what they have felt they tried to do for the good and betterment of the SBC. And there are some things that I think I could certainly agree with them on. Other things I might see differently than they would see, and I might bring a little different approach to some of these issues if I were to be elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, very good. Let's move on from that and jump right into a couple of our issues. Let's talk first about, well, we just talked about that. Sorry about that. Wrong button. It's what happens when I'm the one running it. Explain the Baptist Bill. We've kind of tried to focus on Baptist Bill. Bill is a member getting to go to the Southern Baptist Convention in Indianapolis for the first time. He's from I guess we'd call it a normative size Baptist church, running 75, maybe 100, maybe less at that point. Can you try to explain to him about the GCR briefly and what has happened with the GCR so that Bill understands this when he gets to Indianapolis, having not tracked it like maybe you and I have?
Well, the first thing I would recommend to Bill would be get Chuck Kelly's book, and read it before the convention. That would be the first thing. Chuck Kelly's book, The Best Intentions, How a Plan to Revitalize the SBC actually accelerated its decline. Now, he may not agree with everything that Chuck says in that book, but Chuck has done a thorough analysis of the GCR and the aftermath and the results of the GCR. And I think that all of us would have to say that the Great Commission Resurgence has not blossomed as we had hoped that it would. It has not resulted in the kind of evangelism and church planting that we had hoped that it would. I think we need probably a clear view of exactly where we stand in terms of the GCR. And I think that would mean some of our convention leaders who are aware of the details of the numbers and so forth, that needs to be brought forward so that we can know how many churches have been planted, how many are still viable, how many are still in existence, how many of those churches are still Southern Baptist, have any of those churches become members of other denominations, or have they gone non-denominational? I don't know that there's a great deal of information about that, and I think many Southern Baptists are hopeful to receive more information about that. I think the GCR was well-intentioned. I don't question anybody's motives who were involved in the Great Commission Resurgence when all of that went down a few years ago. But I do think Kelly has demonstrated in his book that there are issues and problems, and we're not where we all had hoped to be. In fact, our convention is, by the numbers, is in decline. We are in decline in terms of actual numbers of Southern Baptists, numbers of churches. We're in decline in terms of giving. The cooperative program giving is on a level of decline. And as best I can tell, for 16 to 20 years, we have been on that scale of decline. I am grieved by that. I'm sure all Southern Baptists are grieved by that. And so I think we need to have an honest look at the GCR. Do we need to revamp anything? Do we need to make adjustments? What does that need to be? Those are the kinds of things that I think need to be addressed.
Well, it sounds very clearly that you feel like the GCR has not worked as at least intended. One of the phrases that Kelly does use in his book, instead of calling it the Great Commission Resurgence, he calls it the Great Commission Regression. And just as you mentioned, a lot of the numbers kind of illustrate that. So what do you think needs to change then? If this hasn't worked, not questioning motives or intentions, but it hasn't worked. So what needs to change then?
Well, I don't know that I have an answer to what needs to change until if I were president of the SBC, I would want to be able to have dialogue with those that are involved with the GCR, key leaders. I would need to be able to dialogue with NAM and their role and what's happening there. I would need to educate myself from those leaders as to their concerns. What do they think is happening? What do they want to see changed? And then I would want to see what changes we can make. What can we reasonably make? I'm sure there are some things that we could do to tweak that in order to enhance the work of GCR, or enhance the effectiveness, that's a better word, of GCR. Everybody believes in church planting. Everybody believes in cooperative giving and cooperative ministry. But wherever that is being hindered, we need to understand, why is it being hindered? What are those reasons? And what do we need to do to recover that sense of ownership that all of us have, convention leaders, pastors, lay people in the convention, the whole 9 yards. And then let's see what we can do to move forward. I do believe we can move forward. I think we need to. And I would hope I could be some help and a catalyst perhaps in that process.
Well, let me ask you this. You brought up Chuck Kelly's book, and in his book, he basically assessed that current leadership are trying to move the SBC toward a centralized control. Do you see that? What is your view?
Well, I do see that the net result of the GCR has been to create a more centralized control than we had prior to that. And in my judgment, any kind of centralized control is not the best way to go. I think we see that in our own government. The more governmental control in a centralized way that you get going nationally, the more problems come out of that, and the less problems are solved. One thing about
What do you see that illustrates that? How do you see that happening? What are some things, if you flesh that out, that gives you that idea that they're trying to move towards centralized control?
Well, in the old days, prior to GCR, the leadership of NAM was involved with all of the local state conventions in a way where the one did not control the other or rule over the other. But since GCR, the funding mechanism has been changed. NAM, it appears to me, has stepped back in the way that they have funded the state conventions, and now state conventions partner with NAM, and NAM has an agreement to send money to those state conventions. But one state convention doesn't know what the next state convention receives. There's a certain secrecy about all of that. And the bottom line is, in that kind of a system, the thing that results out of that is a more centralized control of one entity or agency in the SBC that removes control or removes the kind of partnership that I think we need to be having with state conventions, associations, and finally local churches. That would be one way that I would explain what I think has been happening and what probably needs to be addressed.
Well, now, Baptist Bill, as he shows up at this year's annual meeting in Indianapolis, he's going to hear the report of the GCR task force, the review task force. They just released that they will be releasing that report in advance of the convention on June 1st, I believe. So what recommendations do you think or hope for that the GCR review task force are going to make?
Well, I hope that they will make recommendations of adjustment to address some of the concerns that have been expressed by many Southern Baptists, many pastors about the GCR, and some of these concerns that a man of great reputation like Chuck Kelly, who was a seminary president for many years, longtime Southern Baptist leader, and who researched that issue very carefully. I don't think we need to avoid or reject what he's pointing out, or as are some of the issues that need to be addressed. So I'm hoping that the GCR task force will address those issues. I'm hopeful that they will have assimilated some of the criticism from others, and I'm hopeful that they have done self-evaluation within the leadership, those who are key leaders in the GCR, that they're looking at, okay, hey, what hasn't worked? Let's be open about that, and let's make the adjustments that are necessary to make things work better. That's what I'm hoping to hear. Beyond that, I don't know what those specifics will be, but I will be very interested in that report when it comes out June 1st.
Yeah, I think many Southern Baptists will be. Do you think they will have many clear solutions for redirection, or is it just going to be observation of what's happened?
Well, I don't know, and I don't think any of us would know until the report comes out. I hope it will be both. My hope is that there will be observation of, okay, here's where we are. Here's the transparency. Here are the numbers. Here are the facts over the last several years. Here is where we've succeeded. Here is where we have not done well. And then here are 5 things we're going to do to shore these areas up and move forward with greater ability to reach the lost world for Christ, and a greater effectiveness in church planning and mechanism of giving and relationships with all of our state conventions. That's what I'm hopeful to hear. So I would hope to hear both. Something along the lines, of here are our observations, what we see. And secondly, here are 3 or 5 or 7 recommendations to the convention that we would like to move forward, hopefully in unity, to address some of these issues.
Yeah, I would hope the same, that there would be some clear recommendations that hopefully, maybe even things presented that the convention, the messengers can adopt, to
Right.
make some changes to move forward. Well,
Right.
over these past months, and you just mentioned it several times in your responses, about the need for transparency, and we're having a lack of transparency, that kind of thing. This has been an issue that has continued to surface over these past years, at least the last 5 or 6 years. And of course, the McRaney versus NAM trial, we've had lots of legal issues. As of just a couple of weeks ago, there were 28 pretty high level, visible lawsuits that have been coming against the Southern Baptist Convention, as in the executive committee or other SBC entities at that point. The lack of transparency has been an issue. I want to show you just a quick clip from a previous podcast. This is with a group of, a couple of directors of missions, or what are called associational mission strategists now, and one retired associational mission strategist who is now a pastor in New Mexico or Arizona, I believe. But let's watch this clip, and I want to get your response on the other side. Just to set it up, it starts with me. I'm reading from an email that was distributed by namwhistleblower.com. I about forgot it. namwhistleblower.com. It comes in kind of midstream of that, but then it clarifies itself, makes it clear. Brass to sit there and tell the Gibson County pastors and several others that our small gifts matter not to him, or gifts matter not to him. That's a Tennessee pastor. We did get permission to be able to publish that and dialogue about that. Mark, what would be your response to that kind of statement being said to a group of pastors in a local area?
Try that as a pastor in any church and see how long you last as the pastor of that church. It's unbelievable that someone would downplay the giving of local churches. As Southern Baptists, back in the day, you had the cooperative agreements where the Association, State Convention, and the national entity worked together.
Okay, your response to that. This is Kevin Ezell speaking to a group of West Tennessee pastors, and Joey Hofstetter, I believe was his name, was the pastor who gave us that information.
Well, since I don't have the full context of that, only that clip, it's difficult for me to respond to that, because I want to give Kevin Ezell the benefit of the doubt first. But at the same token, obviously, whatever Kevin Ezell said or how he said it was interpreted by people that were there in the way that was expressed in that clip. And so either way, perception is reality, and that creates a problem. Let me see if I can answer that question with a story from my first pastorate. I've shared this before on a couple of other podcasts, but my first pastorate, my first church was 1982, and a wise old deacon told me on my first Sunday something that I have never forgotten. He said, "Pastor, what people are not up on, they're down on." He said that good communication is the key to minimizing criticism. As the old saying goes among Baptists, trust the Lord and tell the people. Well, I occasionally learn the hard way, the wisdom of his words. Now, of course, leadership can't tell everything, nor should they, but good leaders need to communicate. And as I travel around the convention, and I do so a lot over the last many years, 20 years, even up to 40 years, I've traveled quite a bit in the convention, preached in many of our churches. Most of those churches have been small and medium-sized churches. I've preached in a number of large churches as well. But I hear the same thing, the common theme, the common refrain that I hear from pastors in Southern Baptist churches: grassroots pastors is that they are losing trust with some of our convention leadership because of this very issue of a lack of transparency. And that is a problem. I was just a few weeks ago in a meeting with pastors in Arkansas, many of them, and they told me in that meeting, many of them said, my greatest concern is a lack of transparency. And they expressed 2 or 3 entities, Southern Baptist entities, that they felt like they couldn't get questions answered. They would call, write letters, send emails, never get a response. And so they're frustrated. And I'm telling you, many of our Baptist pastors are frustrated about this issue. And transparency involves financial transparency, but it also involves activity transparency. And we need both. And I do support the 2 amendments or the 2 motions that were made, one by Pastor Rhett Burns of South Carolina, and the other, I think, by David Norman, pastor down in San Antonio, that there be financial accountability, that the convention, that the executive committee or the convention be asked to vote that we make our entities provide an annual form that would answer these questions financially, and that needs to happen. But then also, I think, a what we're doing form. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we did last year. Here's what we didn't do last year, whatever. Because what people, if they're not up on it, they're going to be down on it. That's just human nature. And so we need this kind of transparency. Now, let me say, I agree with the recent president-elect of our executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, Jeff Iorg. Dr. Iorg said about this subject, he said, rebuilding trust, he recognized that trust needs to be rebuilt among some people in the SBC. And he says that involves more than merely asking people to trust you. It involves doing things that are trustworthy so people will naturally trust you. I learned in my pastorates and in the 14 interims that I've done in the pastorate. I've been in the pastorate for many years, and I have learned that if I don't communicate well, people are suspicious. What's he up to? What's he hiding? Why is he not telling us? And that's happening with some of our convention leaders. It may not be that they're hiding anything. I'm certainly not making a blanket statement about all of our SBC leaders, all of whom I know, and most of whom I know personally, and in a friendship with all of them to one level or another. But the issue of trust is a major issue right now in our convention. And people need to have an answer when they ask questions. They don't need to be stonewalled. We don't need a nothing to see here, move on mentality.
Just to be totally honest, that's a whole lot of what's been gotten. In fact, very rarely has there been any kind of response at all, especially the one that has been in the news the most over the last 7 years has been the North American Mission Board. But this idea of the Form 990, now they're not asking that this form be submitted to the IRS, but the similar type reporting.
Right.
And so you're supportive of that. But when we start talking about, let's just back up a little bit to like the McRaney NAM case. This has been in the news last 6.5, 7 years. The oral arguments were had for that on April 4th of 2024, just a few weeks ago. And in those arguments, the North American Mission Board has argued that they should have immunity from any type of responsibility, accountability, whatever, for what they have done. In fact, in the depositions leading up to the Northwestern District Court, it's now at the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court on appeal. But in that case, what ended up happening was they had a number of individuals that gave depositions. And Barry Hankins, who is a Baptist historian, you may know of Barry Hankins.
Yes.
He's a historian from Baylor. He made this comment in his deposition of this case. He said, if NAM's interpretation of the First Amendment prevailed, every Baptist entity that cooperates in any way with the SBC would be put at risk. Further, he says, it is my opinion as a scholar of church-state relations in the U.S. that NAM's First Amendment defense in this case, if accepted by the courts, would actually undermine religious liberty rather than safeguard it. Then in the oral arguments, the Mr. Martins, who's referred to here on April 4th, he argued on behalf of NAM, and he argued that they should have implied consent. Gant, who is the attorney, I've got the quote up here, this is from that transcript, Mr. Gant responded this way. He said, Mr. Martin seems to be suggesting that somehow because BCMD and NAM agreed to do some work together, pause for a second, he's referring to the strategic partnership agreement, which is kind of a covenant between the two. He said, if they agree to do some work together, that immunizes NAM from claims by Dr. McRaney on the notion that and he cites Watson for this notion of implied consent. Now, Dr. Allen, that is of real concern, I think, to many. What their argument was on that day is because he was Martin's, for NAM's attorney, one of their attorneys, was arguing it's a part of their governance, and the court had no right to interject themselves into governance at all. And because it was part of their governance, that they could make that decision. And they could do that. Now, in their court argument, they have previously multiple times, I'm not going to go into it, we've done it in other places at other times, but in multiple cases between the Supreme Court, U.S. Fifth Circuit Court, and the Northern District Court, they've used the terms the Baptist Church to refer to our convention, or the Southern Baptist Church, kind of like Catholics. They've referred to themselves as the Southern Baptist Mission Board, as if there is no international mission board, to give the illusion, at least this is my argument, give the illusion that we are like the Catholics, that there is a hierarchy and the court shouldn't stick their nose in there. What is your view on all of this, the way they're representing themselves or misrepresenting Southern Baptist polity in this argument now, which is before the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court?
Well, anything that I would say there would just be an opinion because I'm not up to speed on that lawsuit, and I don't know the details of that. And I'm certainly no legal scholar, but I can tell you this. To me, the bottom line here of this kind of thing is this: is the North American Mission Board an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention? The answer to that question is yes, it is. And therefore, the North American Mission Board is owned and operated by the Southern Baptist Convention. The Southern Baptist Convention is all of her churches and all of the people who make up those churches and who give the money for the North American Mission Board's budget to be able to do what she does. And on that basis alone, and coupled with our Baptist polity of the autonomy of the local church, and we are not a top-down organization, NAM does not run the churches, and this is through votes of the convention and the trustee boards and so forth, the NAM is ultimately accountable to the churches, not the other way around. And so that's really the key. The key is understanding biblically and our Baptist history, the polity of what it means to be Baptist, the autonomy of local churches, the fact that all of our agencies, all of our entities and agencies are owned and operated by the Southern Baptist Convention, and are therefore accountable to the people who give the money for those entities to function. Where would the North American Mission Board be, or the International Mission Board, or our seminaries, or any other Southern Baptist entity and agency be without the financial support of the people? So I have no clue how that.
Let's zero in on that then.
Okay.
If the North American Mission Board has repeatedly to the court made this argument of the Baptist Church, the Southern Baptist Church, the SBC entity, we know that's not Baptist polity. That's not the way we operate.
Right.
Do you see that as giving an inference that we're trying to be all one church under one hierarchy, one organization? Is it more important for them to represent Baptist polity truthfully or to win this case?
Well, no, it's more important to represent Baptist polity truthfully. There's no question about that, because if they don't do that and they win the case, we are all still the losers in the long run. And so it is definitely more important to be biblically sound and to be sound from in terms of Baptist polity on the autonomy of the local church and the fact that there is no such thing as the Baptist church.
Right. So what do you think are the ramifications then of a ruling that any contractual agreement forms an association so that there is implied consent, meaning that the North American Mission Board, in this case, the organization, must abide by the North American Mission Board's governance?
Yeah, that would be a violation, in my judgment, of Baptist polity, and would be unwise to go down that road for sure.
Who should speak out about it then?
We all need to speak out about that, but the trustees.
Why have our leaders been silent?
Well, I don't know that some have been. I'm hopeful that some of our board members, trustee members at NAM would speak out to that, or at least have that discussion, because that is vital that we do that. It's always a mistake to move toward any form of centralization. We don't need to move that direction. That will always be a mistake. And there are also possible legal ramifications down the road that when the North American Mission Board, if she were to be sued, and she is being sued, by the way, some of these lawsuits that the convention is facing involve the North American Mission Board. Then if the decisions go the wrong way, based on the judge's ruling or a jury's ruling, those even churches that are tied in with the North American Mission Board could be found legally liable for things the North American Mission Board itself has done, because they created an unnecessary connectionalism, legally and otherwise, that's really a violation of Baptist polity. And so I'm hopeful that doesn't happen, but we're treading a dangerous road. We're on a dangerous road here. And again, I don't know all the details. I want to give NAM the benefit of the doubt as much as I can, but I do have to admit the things that are reported that I've seen some that apparently the NAM's lawyers have made certainly seems problematic to me, on the foundation of what true Baptist polity is all about.
Well, let's ask this then, and we'll get off of NAM and move on to some of these other subjects. But if NAM wins this case with McRaney, both sides are saying that they're fighting for religious liberty. But if NAM wins this case, how do you think cooperating SBC churches are going to respond, and why?
I don't know how they will respond, for this simple reason. I've lived long enough to discover that whenever you've got Baptists, you don't know what they're going to do. You never know how they're going to respond. But I can tell you that if let's say the case is won by NAM, and then NAM continues to move in the direction of a more centralized approach with state conventions and the churches that are in those state conventions, I can guarantee you there are many of those Southern Baptist churches that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they will back away from their financial support. And that is, of course, what I hope we can avoid. I hope we can solve these things before we get to that point. But one thing is sure, I know this from it's not anecdotal evidence, it's personal evidence. You know, I've talked to many pastors, and they are already scaling back their support of some of our SBC entities and agencies financially because of this kind of problem.
Yeah, it seems to continue to surface. I hear the same thing that I'm hearing from pastors, either restricting their giving now. Some of I think most of the state conventions now are permitting that. I know as a young pastor, I would have never imagined that. You give your money to the cooperative program and it's dispersed as it should have. I would have never imagined saying, well, I don't want some of it to go to NAM or ERLC or whatever the complaint is. But most of the conventions now have made that a possibility and made it where that can be done without a doubt.
Well, it can be done in some state conventions, but now probably many Southern Baptists are unaware that not all state conventions are created equal on that.
That's true.
There are some state conventions where you can designate your money, and then it will be designated in terms of what that state convention sends to the executive committee through the cooperative program. However, there are some state conventions, and I don't know them all, so I'm not going to try to name one or two, but there are state conventions where you cannot negatively designate. If you give your money from your church to that state convention, that you can hope or ask them to negative designate, but the convention will not do it because their structure right now is to give everything that comes in, whatever that percentage is that's going to the SBC, is going whether you like it or not. I don't think Southern
whatever
Baptists,
state you're in, you need to check that out if you're
they
wanting
need
to do
that's
that.
right. Whatever state you're in, you need to check that out.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I know churches are escrowing money and a lot of other things they're doing to try to hold off in giving and supporting at that point. Well, let's take another shift. One of the more emotional issues that have been facing Southern Baptists has been the issue of abuse. And this has surfaced over the last couple of years, particularly on the floor of by the messengers. A couple of years ago, when Mike Stone was running for president, he's an abuse survivor himself, and he was attacked at the convention. And a survivor who has now filed suit against the SBC and is very public about wanting to see the demise of the SBC and the end of the SBC, had attacked at that point. And I want to play a quick clip from an interview we did with him and just get your response on the other side, because this is a very volatile issue and a lot has been happening in the area of abuse here just lately.
Say, as a survivor of sexual abuse, you could call me an awful lot of things that would not be any more wicked, any more vile, or any more untrue. We have got to be able to have an honest, Christ-like, brother-honoring, sister-honoring discussion without throwing these needless jabs at one another that you don't care about sexual abuse. So I think one of the things we've got to do, and from the office of president, I would seek to do this, is to tone down the rhetoric and to just get the best ideas to the table without name-calling and without impugning someone's character or their integrity.
Your response?
Well, my response is, number one, I would agree with every syllable of what Mike Stone just said. I think he's absolutely right. And I can't imagine any Southern Baptist who would disagree with that, because part of the tone and rhetoric is out of control and does need to be reined in. But now let me be clear on this issue. Sexual abuse is egregious, it is sinful, it is criminal, and it is wrong in every setting, and it needs to be addressed. And those who are convicted of sexual abuse need to pay the fullest penalty of the law. I cannot be stronger on that. I believe we need to do all that we can as Southern Baptists to root out any sexual abuse. There should not be any sexual abuse. I know if I live in the real world and people are sinful, but survivors deserve justice. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to have their voice heard. And the Southern Baptist Convention needs to do everything responsibly within our power in order to provide for them and for churches, the proper resources, the training, and all that we can provide. Those are things that definitely need to happen. Of course, to cover up sexual abuse is also an egregious sin, and anyone who does so needs to be dealt with to the fullest extent of the law as well. But having said that, I also need to say that there are many people who methodologically might differ with some Southern Baptists on how best to address this issue. And those people, when there's a difference of opinion methodologically about how to address sexual abuse, one side should not say to the other side, you're trying to cover up sexual abuse. That is wrong. That is sinful. Sexual abuse must be dealt with, but it's got to be dealt with in a biblically just manner. That's so very critical. And also, hopefully most of our Southern Baptists don't go down this road, but to say that anybody who claims they have been sexually abused, they need to be listened to. We need to hear them out and evaluate and investigate and get to the very bottom of that. But we also need to realize that it's a mighty thin pancake that only has one side. And there are many cases, well, let me rephrase that. There are certainly some cases where people have been falsely accused of sexual abuse. Right. We need to care about those people as well. Those people need to be given biblical justice, just like people that have been sexually abused should be given biblical justice. Now, one of the things that does grieve me is that when the executive committee was discussing all of these things, certain decisions were being made about the waiving of attorney-client privilege so we can get to the bottom of this or whatever. And people who thought that some of that was legally problematic were accused of covering up sexual abuse or trying to cover it up. That was wrong. And that troubles me greatly. And that needs to be, that attitude, that's the kind of thing that needs to be changed.
It has frequently been used, the term has been used, it's a systemic problem.
Yes.
I mean, how do you respond? Is this a systemic problem in the Southern Baptist Convention?
No, it is not.
Okay, explain.
It's not a crisis and it's not a systemic problem by definition of the word crisis and systemic. It is a problem. It should not be ignored. There are too many cases of this. But really, the issue is not, is this a systemic problem? Is it a crisis? Is it not a crisis? I don't think any of that's the issue. The issue, the more important issue, is every single case of sexual abuse is one too many. And therefore, we need to address that with biblical principles and biblically just methodology. And so let's figure out how we do that. Let's allow Scripture to guide the principles, and let's come up with what's the best way to do it. And I've said there are 5 keys in this. Number 1 is the biblical principles. Number 2 is genuine compassion for those who have been abused. Number 3 is a financially prudent plan of how to address this. Number 4, sound legal strategies for dealing with it. And number 5, methodologically, a wise blueprint for action. And we need to do that. Look, Southern Baptists have made clear over the last 5 years they are concerned about sexual abuse. I don't know anybody who is not concerned about it. It is a problem. It does need to be addressed. There are things that we can do, but we must follow those 5 principles and do it wisely and biblically and in a financial prudent way, because we cannot sustain the multiple lawsuits that are ongoing, and especially in a situation where our own accounting people have told us in our last year's EC report, they said that the drain financially is unsustainable. They made that point. Unsustainable. Southern Baptists need to hear that. What's happening right now is not working. At least it's not working of how best to spend cooperative program money dollars. We've got to come up with a better solution, and I hope that we can do that. But I think it needs
part of the effort to do that has been this ARC. Now, they have created this Abuse Response Commission. Do you think that's a viable solution?
Well, I don't know that it is. I'm not optimistic that it is a viable solution, because it is a commission that is not accountable to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Okay, explain for us the relationship as you understand it of this creation and how it stands as far as the relationship to the SBC then.
Well, the ARC is a nonprofit organization that Josh Wester and his committee have proposed, and this was explained to the executive committee. Information about this was given to the executive committee, but there are several things that the Southern Baptist Convention people need to know. The new ARC was not voted on by the executive committee. They simply received the information. There was no action. by the executive committee to inaugurate this. This is a group of people who want to create this organization, 501c3 as I understand it, but it is not accountable to the executive committee. So my view is, hey, if churches want to utilize this group, fine, let them do that. But if churches are uncomfortable doing that, that's also fine. If, though, there is a move for cooperative program dollars to fund the ARC, I would immediately say, whoa, let's hold the horses here. That would need to be thoroughly vetted through the executive committee and voted on by the Southern Baptist Convention. Because
millions of dollars have already been spent on what has been done thus far.
Right.
So as far as that goes, then how do you think they need to fund this? If they're going to have this ARC, who should fund it?
Well, that can be anybody that wants to, in terms of local
Well,
churches.
they came to our entities first. They came to the entities and said, hey, we want you to help fund it.
They did. And in my view, to the credit of Kevin Ezell and Paul Chitwood, NAM and IMB, they refused to fund it because right now it's too amorphous. There's so much confusion about what this group will do, how will they be accountable. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and that gives me pause to want to rush full bore into this. There needs to be much more investigation, much more information on the table before we put any cooperative program money into it. And that's my view at this point. Now, and if there is going to be direct funding from the SBC, that needs to be vetted through the EC, and then that motion would need to be made to the convention and so forth, because that would essentially make this new group either an entity or an agency. And I think there would have to be approval for that to take place. But until that time, I'm uncomfortable with the ARC as it stands, because there are just too many unanswered questions about it.
Okay. What mistakes do you think have been made by the executive committee related to this issue of abuse? As president, how would you help redirect?
Well, I think, again, I hate to be kind of the negative guy here on some things, but I believe that we have made three major mistakes. I believe that the executive committee has made, as a group, not everybody in it, because not everybody necessarily votes unanimously on all of these issues. But in my opinion, and that's all it is, one Southern Baptist opinion, I think three mistakes have been made. Mistake number one was the waiving of attorney-client privilege. That was presented, that was a part of the motion that did come to the Southern Baptist Convention. And I think the Southern Baptist Convention, in a desire in their emotions as well as their head, wanted to say we need to do something about sexual abuse. But I don't think the convention fully understood the ramifications legally and financially of waiving attorney-client privilege. As you know, that was debated back and forth within the executive committee, and it was finally voted that we would waive attorney-client privilege. That, in my view, has been a serious problem because it is costing us money. That's part of it. I think the second mistake that was made was the mistake of indemnifying Guidepost Solutions. The original task force, in their contract with Guidepost Solutions, recommended that the EC indemnify them. Now, that was a serious problem, because by indemnifying them, what that means is if they are sued, we're on the hook legally for their defense. And that's exactly what has happened. Right now, Guidepost Solutions is under at least 2 lawsuits. The Johnny Hunt lawsuit includes them, and the David Seals lawsuit includes them. Now, Therefore, every year we are paying the legal fees of that entity being sued. That's cooperative program money, by the way. And let me tell you, because I happen to know this, it is in the millions of dollars. In fact, last year we paid somewhere, I think, just under $2.5 million in lawsuits alone. And this was a second mistake in indemnifying Guidepost Solutions, I think, was a major mistake. And we're paying for that mistake right now because they're being sued. And if a lawsuit goes against them, either way, whether it goes against them or not, it doesn't matter. We're paying their legal fees. And that's cooperative program money that's being spent. And I think that was a major mistake, number two, that the majority of the executive committee made. Number three, and this is not necessarily an executive committee issue, but there are some people who have suggested that we need to assume corporate guilt and liability for what one Southern Baptist Church may do wrongly in the issue of sexual abuse. So that if a church here in Texas makes a mistake or doesn't deal with sexual abuse properly, and there's a lawsuit, and then all the other SBC churches and all of the other states need to be willing to accept corporate guilt for that. That is hugely a mistake. In fact, I just think that's wrong.
Well, there's more than 47,000 Southern Baptist churches. I don't know what the final count is right now, but yeah.
The Southern Baptist Convention should never vote to accept responsibility for what it cannot biblically or legally control in local churches. That's the bottom line. Again, this is a problem that fails to recognize what it means to be a local church, the local issue of local church autonomy. But
well, you used the word a while ago, connectivity. I've used that same kind of word, but some of these lawsuits, particularly the McRaney-Nam lawsuit, where they've continued to use the language that kind of frames it all like we're like the Catholic Church with this kind of a structure, that directly impacts this without any doubt. In fact, right after the Guidepost Solutions report first came out, I just did a quick search before one of our podcasts and found dozens of advertisements were already up from lawyers, attorneys saying, hey, if you've been harmed by a church, come to us, we'll sue the SBC, et cetera, all the different entity levels, because they're already seeing the connectivity in that. Thus, one of the real concerns with the NAM lawsuit, if NAM wins that the way they're presenting it right now.
Well, it's a serious problem, and it needs to be addressed. I think there are those who are beginning to realize that particularly these two issues, not many people are calling for corporate liability, corporate sinfulness, corporate liability. Now, there are a few voices that have called for that, but the majority have not called for that. But those previous two issues, indemnifying Guidepost Solutions and waiving attorney-client privilege, those two actions I totally disagree with. I feel like those actions were seriously mistaken. I don't question the motives of anybody, but I just think those decisions lacked wisdom. And now I think we're seeing that, and we're paying for it financially. When I say paying for it, I'm talking to the tune of millions. We're not talking about $10 here or $500. We're talking about millions of dollars, and many of these lawsuits are still outstanding. I'm told that there are over 40 lawsuits that are currently pending against some entity, agency, individual person, state convention, some aspect in Southern Baptist life, that there are more than 40 lawsuits currently pending. That is a disaster for Southern Baptists that we are at that point. And so we're more known for litigation than we are for soul winning.
Yeah, and
And
that didn't used to be the case for sure.
never, no,
Well,
that did not
let's
used to
take
be.
a quick turn.
Okay.
But we still want to cover some of these other issues. Another big issue that has surfaced is what is called the Law Amendment. Again, talking to Baptist Bill, who doesn't have all the background, all the history, try to explain to him how the Law Amendment is different from previous amendments and what is covered. How is it different than what is covered in our Baptist Faith and Message?
Well, the law amendment is a recommended amendment to the bylaws of the Southern Baptist Convention, to Article 3 particularly. And in Article 3, it adds a sixth statement. And here's the statement. The law amendment says that we need to add this. It says that we will affirm, appoint, or employ only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture. Now, the first thing is this amendment passed at the previous convention last summer to the tune of 80 to 90%. I mean, it was it was a very strong vote. I would say 80 to 90%. But as an amendment to the Constitution and bylaws, it has to be voted on 2 consecutive conventions. So it will be voted on a second time this year. And the law amendment now is being heavily debated. Now, to your specific question, does the law amendment say anything differently than what's already in the Baptist Faith and Message, our doctrinal statement? The answer to that is no. Our doctrinal statement clearly states that pastors, elders, and overseers, those 3 terms in English and the Greek terms behind them, are all interchangeably used for one office. The office of pastor, or you want to call him an elder, you want to call him an overseer, all 3 of those terms are used interchangeably to describe an office. And that office is mandated in Scripture to be held by men only. And so the doctrinal statement very clearly makes that point. However, there are a number of people today who have an approach that is saying that all we need to do is closely identify, that's the phrase, closely identify with our doctrinal statement, but we don't necessarily have to agree with everything in it. Well, once you open that door, and by the way, that was a change that was made to the BF&M, I think in 2014. I may be wrong about that, but it was made a few years back to add that phrase, that concept of closely aligned with or closely identified with. Well, now the question is, well, what can we pick and choose that we don't agree with? And can we say that, well, we just don't agree? A woman should be allowed to be a pastor. Scripture is very clear on that. Very clear. And the law amendment simply clarifies what's already stated in our doctrinal statement. But here's the difference. Whereas people can say, well, it's a matter of interpretation in the Baptist Faith and Message, if this is codified and approved and goes into the bylaws of the convention, then it will be crystal clear that churches that attempt to have a woman in the role of pastor, elder, or overseer is in violation of the Constitution. And then the convention could easily make a decision, if they wanted to say that church is not in friendly cooperation with the SBC. So this is actually a watershed issue. It's a very important issue, and I'm in favor of the law amendment. I know there are good people that disagree and differ.
Well, if it brings me to the next question. If passed, will the law amendment impact the membership of the SBC churches as far as positively or negatively?
Well, if you mean by that, will it affect members? Will it affect churches that are currently affiliated with the SBC as to their future affiliation? I think that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, it could be, or it could be, will more churches want to join with the convention because of the passing?
Right.
It could be either. Yeah.
It could be either. I will say that at this point, it doesn't matter in this sense. It doesn't matter whether the law amendment passes or doesn't pass, because there are going to be churches that leave, Southern Baptist churches that leave the convention whether it is passed or whether it is not passed. So that's the first thing. There are going to be churches that are a little bit more progressive and maybe a little bit more liberal in their understanding of the role, whether a woman can serve as a pastor in a church or not. And those people are not, I think some of them will leave. Some of those churches will step out. But on the other hand, if the law amendment is not passed, and there continues to be a growing number of SBC churches that have a woman in the role of a pastor, there are going to be a number of conservative churches that are unhappy with that, and they're going to leave. And so either way, the convention is going to be impacted, and this impact will include a financial impact. But the issue is not, the bottom line issue is truth. The issue is not how's this going to impact us financially. Yes, we need to think about that. But more important is adherence to Scripture, adherence to doctrinal truth. And I think the law amendment is valuable because it clarifies what our doctrinal statement says. It's going to remove wiggle room because this will be placed in our Constitution and bylaws. I think this is a watershed issue. I think it is a crucial issue, and I'm personally in favor of the law amendment and its passage.
All right, let's wrap up with a few questions from those in our group. Additional questions, many of those that we've been talking about are questions multiple people have asked along the way. But one asked specifically of you, if elected, how will you protect against using the presidency as a means of getting more clients for your consulting business?
Well, I guess that's a good question. Of course, there is obviously, when a person becomes president of the Southern Baptist Convention, there's a level of exposure that is raised at that point. And so there is nothing wrong with that part of it. Now, if I were to attempt to use the Southern Baptist Convention platform, Southern Baptist Convention money, or anything like that in order to gain more clients for my preaching coach ministry, yes, that would be wrong. That would be, I think, unethical. And I would repudiate that and refuse to do that. So let me be frank. Let me be clear.
Just feel like it'd be a conflict of interest.
That would be.
I got you. Okay, a couple of other questions, and we're going to kind of rapid fire these since we've run a little long now. But on Twitter, or X now, Tom Edwards writes, be sure to ask Dr. David Allen if he associates with any non-Calvinist groups. Jared Moore and his connection to the Credo Alliance are definitely more narrow than the Baptist Faith and Message. You're probably friends with Bruce Frank and Mike Keybone, to be sure to question their outside involvement. So they're questioning your outside involvements with, apparently, at least the way I read this, is with possibly groups that are more narrow than what even our Baptist Faith and Message is.
Well, let me say very clearly that I'm not associated with or a member of any group. I'm not a part of any group. I'm not a member of the Conservative Baptist Network, which, by the way, has people that are Calvinist and non-Calvinist in it. I'm not a member of any Calvinist organization, but I'm also not a member of any non-Calvinist organization. The only thing I'm a member of is a local Baptist church. Now, let me clarify to say I have friends in all of these organizations. I have Calvinist friends and I have non-Calvinist friends. And so I associate with all groups. When I was dean of the School of Theology and dean of the School of Preaching at Southwestern Seminary during those 18 years, I was responsible for inviting and hosting people at our preaching conferences and workshops. And I was very careful to involve people who were Calvinist and invite them, and those who were non-Calvinist. And so I feel like my track record has been very fair in that. Now, it's true, I'm not a Calvinist. I think everybody knows that. I've written scholarly works on the subject of Calvinism, but I haven't been hard-nosed or polemical about that.
Okay, and very good.
I have friends in all of these.
Move on to a question from Dwayne Rogers. He asked, does Dr. Allen believe sexual abuse is widespread in the SBC churches?
Well, I certainly hope it is not. And again, this keys in on the meaning of the word widespread. What does widespread mean? Does that mean that half of our churches have people, that pastors and leaders that are sexually abusing people? If that's what that means, if that's the meaning of widespread, then no, I do not think it is widespread. Do I think that there is sexual abuse, has been sexual abuse, and probably cases of sexual abuse that are unknown? Yes. And as I said earlier, one of those cases is one too many. And so the issue is not how many there are. The issue is how we deal with each one of them. We don't ignore them. We don't cover them up. We deal with those with biblical principles and wisdom from heaven to address those who have been abused and those who abuse.
Very good. All right, let's do one more question. This is from Brian Gilmore. Says, so here is a flexing moment. Jack Graham to show support for Dr. Allen. Oh, he posted the video of you speaking at Prestonwood. He says, Dr. Allen, my thought all morning has been the following. A vote for Dr. David Allen is a vote to keep Paige Patterson, Judge Paul Pressler, and other legacies intact. How would you respond to Brian?
Well, I would just say that's ludicrous. And here's why it's ludicrous. Because Paige Patterson for 5 years has been off the scene in the SBC. Judge Paul Pressler has been off the scene as far as any role of leadership in the SBC. So all of that is the case. And so their legacies rest on their deeds and people's decision of what they have done or what they didn't do. Those are their legacies. I don't have anything to do with their legacies. In fact, with respect to Paul Pressler, I placed something on my personal website at drdavidallen.org. That's drdavidallen.org about Paul Pressler and my repudiation of all of his alleged conduct. And that's very clearly stated on there. And so even though I worked for many years for Dr. Paige Patterson, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything Dr. Patterson did or everything he does or whatever. And there's the last thing in the world, that the last reason why I would be running for president of the Southern Baptist Convention is not to preserve any of their legacies. I have no desire to do that, no intent to do that. I am my own person, and I'm a Southern Baptist, and I'm doing this because I see the need that is out there. You know, I learned.
I was just going to say, saying that, let's transition. We're wrapping up. So let me give you one last chance to kind of, what is the main thing you want people to get from your candidacy when they think of David Allen running for president? Why should they, as such, pull the lever, punch the card for your name? What is your real reason for wanting to be there and them supporting you versus one of the other 5 candidates?
Well, if they'll go to my website, they can see a detailed answer to that question. I'll give only the short answer here, but if they'll go to my personal website and look at the document, the Southern Baptist Convention Praise, Problems, and Promise, I do answer that question of what I'm about, why I'm running. And basically, what I want to do is build this on truth, trust, and transparency. We've got to have trust, because if we don't have trust, we can't have cooperation. If we don't cooperate together, our ministry effectiveness is lessened and is hindered. And if we don't cooperate together, we're losing what it means to be a Southern Baptist, or at least what it means to be a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. So I'm not interested in looking in the rearview mirror and throwing mud at mistakes that maybe people have made in the past. I'm interested in looking forward, looking ahead. And one of the things I learned when I was a young pastor, I'm ashamed to tell you this, but our church, I became pastor of my first church. It was a new church plant in 1982. And in the first year or two of that church, we had proportionately one of the fastest growing churches in the Dallas area in terms of proportional growth. And I read all the church growth books I could read. And I learned that if I would go out on the church property during Sunday school, count the number of cars in my parking lot, multiply by 2.3, that would tell me how many people are in Sunday school that day. And so I used to do that. I'd go out during Sunday school. I wanted to make sure that we had more this week than we had last week. And then Let me tell you how God broke me of that. Vance Havner. Vance Havner is a name many of our listeners will know. Some of our younger listeners will not know. Vance Havner said this in a sermon preaching to pastors one time. He said, some of you pastors are more concerned about the absence of the people than the presence of the Lord. And that God used to get all over me. And I said, dear God, let me in my ministry not be more concerned about who's not there, but Lord, let me be concerned that you are there. And I will tell you this, I've learned through the years, there's no problem in the Southern Baptist Convention that the Lord can't solve, that his presence can't solve. And I know the Lord is omnipresent, and I understand that theologically, and you do as well. But my goal is to let's quit worrying. We've got a lot of problems we have to address, but let's worry less about the absence of the people, the downturn in giving and so forth. Let's worry less about that, and let's be more concerned about the presence of the Lord. That's the note that I would want to sing, and the note that I would want to play if I'm elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
David, thank you so much for joining us tonight to be a part of this another presidential interview that we've had tonight. Thank you for joining us. Just for our viewers, so they know, be aware that there is a playlist that's linked in the video description that links to all of the interviews. We have one more interview after this one with David Spencer. So we hope you'll stay tuned for any other updates. Thank you.